Hi, and welcome to me talking about chapters 15 and 16 of Virginia Giuffre's Nobody's Girl. I am a survivor of CSA and DV myself, which means I see a lot of myself in this text. I've explained some of her psychology, some of the abuser's psychology, and some of my own experience to try to shed light on the problems of CSA and DV. So, let's go. Okay, now we're to chapter 15, A Bridge Too Far. In that chapter, on page 140, we see her describe one of probably the scariest clients she ever had to serve. One who she described in legal filings only as a well-known prime minister. He wasn't interested in caresses, he wanted violence. He repeatedly me until I lost consciousness and took pleasure in seeing me in fear for my life. Horrifically, the Prime Minister laughed when he hurt me and got more aroused when I begged him to stop. I emerged from the cabana bleeding. For days it hurt to breathe and to swallow. Afterward, I tearfully begged Epstein not to send me back to the Prime Minister. I got down on my knees and pleaded with him. I didn't know if Epstein feared the man or if he owed him a favor, but he wouldn't make any promises, saying coldly of the politician's brutality, "You'll get that sometimes." It's sweet and naive that she assumed Epstein didn't want to send her to him. He probably paid extra to be able to do that to girls. And as she later comments in the same chapter, Epstein said that women were merely a life support system for a vagina. When that's all you see when you look at a person, even a person who is loyal to and adores you, you're not going to mind them getting roughed up. It's probably why a lot of men feel comfortable roughing up their partners. After the attack, I couldn't stay a fool, having been treated so brutally and then seeing Epstein's callous reaction to how terrorized I felt. I had to accept that Epstein meted out praise merely as a manipulation to keep me subservient. Epstein cared only about Epstein. This caused her to both open her eyes, and it caused her to spiral out emotionally. This is not at all uncommon, and I imagine a lot of people are like me and stay with abusive partners while imbibing a lot of chemicals, alcohol in my case, to make it tolerable. Because at that point, you're already convinced that you can't do much of anything else. But you also had the good parts, the dreams, the hopes, the positive emotions stripped away because their one-sidedness finally became wholly and bald-facedly revealed. Which means no love can exist, no happiness can exist, but you're generally not sure you can exist in any other way by this point in the relationships. It's dark, and the version of that she talks about is dark as well. But she ultimately changed her mind when Epstein and Maxwell made an even more audacious request of her than anything they had made previously. He came out with it. "Jenna, I want you to have our baby." Though I'd heard him talk hypothetically about seeding the human race with his DNA, his proposal shocked me. I remember trying not to flinch as Maxwell joined in with the final particulars. "You'd have round-the-clock nannies to help you," she said, her voice oddly chirpy. "Jeffrey would buy you a mansion in Palm Beach or New York, your choice. And you would have a hefty allowance." If memory serves, she floated the astronomical figure of $200,000 per month. But there were conditions. It wouldn't be her child, it would be theirs. And she said, "Everything about Epstein and Maxwell's brazen request felt wrong. There was no way I wanted to bring a child into the world for them to raise. What if the baby were female? Was the plan for Epstein and Maxwell to have me bring that little girl up until she reached puberty, then hand her over for them to abuse? I wanted no part of it. Epstein and Maxwell had made so many demands that I had met, ignoring my own feelings in the hope of pleasing them. But this proposal would endanger another person, a helpless child. It was a bridge too far. And while no one offered to pay me so that I could have their baby, this is also a very similar breaking point for me. It's very common for victims to not have any respect or care for themselves. It is, in fact, encouraged, both in word and deed, by the way people have treated them. So it's no surprise that people internalize that. But we often do care more about other people, particularly our own children. In my case, this showed up as my actual motivation to leave. I realized, after quite a bit of coaching from an actual friend, someone who genuinely cared about me, that staying wouldn't just be bad for me, but it would be bad for him. It would teach him relationship patterns that are wildly unhealthy and probably lead to him repeating my mistakes if I stayed. I didn't want that for him. So I left. I don't think anything else would have done it. There's something about being up in the air, especially when traveling solo. It's as if the world below ceases to be, and to me, that is a relief. I decide when to sleep, when to eat. My own needs, no one else's, come first. During my 21-hour journey from New York to Singapore, and then on to Bangkok and finally Chiang Mai, I wasn't used to these feelings of independence, but I enjoyed them. By my third and final flight, I was tired, but there was no sleeping now. My body was humming, as if jolted by electricity. Could it really be that, at least for the moment, I was free? So this is her flying away from Maxwell and Epstein to a massage school in Thailand. She was using the trip as a method of escaping their grip entirely and had no intention of going back, but she was also hoping to get the education they promised her while she was there. This was her escape plan. It was her plan to set up her life and to make good on the promises they had made, which means it's actually very optimistic, but it's a little bit disheartening to read it and see that the optimism is a preference for being alone, for not being touched, for being distant. Happiness isn't being distant. Happiness is being engaged with things and people and activities that are worth it, that help and heal more than they hurt, that give as much or more than they take from you. And while it's good to appreciate all we can, I get the feeling that this is really the best she had had so far, and all it was hope and distance from everything she had ever known. Which, yeah, also probably common for people with these experiences. I know I spent most of my life isolated and dissociated. I still don't really get out. And I don't mind that because I'm safe when I'm alone. Let's go on. I wish I could tell you that a few hours later I awoke, grabbed a fun saver, and headed out into the sunshine to explore this exotic new place. Instead, my first 2 days in Chiang Mai, I stayed put, eating fried rice and french fries I ordered from room service and waiting for the phone to ring. Just as in that creepy 5th-floor bedroom in Epstein's Manhattan townhouse, I felt as if I were on call and would be punished if I failed to answer. I know that probably sounds ridiculous. There was no one there to reprimand me. Still, I'd lived by Epstein and Maxwell's rules for more than 2 years. When Maxwell called to check in, I picked up before the second ring. So I met the person who was my main adult abuser in life in college. I left him at the end of, I think it was my freshman year. Yes, definitely my freshman year. And I went to a town a couple hours away from where my family lived to date a couple. And they were delightful, like absolutely wonderful. But I didn't really leave their apartment when I was there. They told me to. The girl in particular encouraged me to go out multiple times, just browse through the stores, do some shopping, have fun. You don't have to wait for us all the time. But I couldn't, and just had a panic attack every time I went anywhere. And that's purely the result of having spent a full year with my ex at that point. And he had restricted his grip on me more and more and more as time had gone on. I would find out that he had been stalking me and seen me going places that I went without him. And he even physically assaulted me when I went places without him. If I asked to go places and he wasn't going with me, then I couldn't go. And that gets ingrained as a kind of subconscious fear. When you aren't allowed to talk to other people, when you aren't allowed to go out alone, when there are consequences if you do, it can be hard to break that even when you're not in a state of danger anymore. Our bodies learn the lessons even when our mind knows better. It takes active work. It takes time to deprogram that. I'm not surprised it took her a few days before she could go out again. It took me longer than that. So part of the reason that they sent Virginia to Thailand was to hunt down and recruit a girl that they knew lived there. Maxwell would periodically call and say, "Have you tracked down the girl Jeffrey wants you to meet?" Maxwell asked in every phone call. I told her no, not yet, and then promised I would, but I never did. Every time I ignored her commands and nothing bad happened, I got a little braver. Before long, I was exploring Chiang Mai with gusto. So that's important. As I was just discussing, it is often the consequences for disobedience, the consequences for going it alone, the consequences for talking to other people that conditions us not to do those things. Not being punished, even when you're in regular contact with people, can do a lot to uncondition that. This also kind of puts some light in the thing in the last video with her recruiting another girl for Epstein. Even though she only did that a handful of times before she stopped because she hated doing it, when she did obey, it was probably from that fear of consequences and that desire to please. At this point, she's lost the desire to please, so all she had to get rid of was the fear of consequences. And that is what she gained by not being reprimanded, not being punished or pushed when she said, "No, I haven't recruited her yet." Really, Maxwell did her a favor by calling if that's what she was going to do. But as we've discussed, Virginia's primary method of responding when she isn't being coerced into behaving in specific ways is acting out, and that was also true here. I spent little time pondering the consequences of my decisions. It wasn't that I thought I was superior or immortal. I have many faults, but arrogance is not one of them. Instead, I think that a core part of me felt undeserving of self-defense. I'd managed to convince Epstein and Maxwell to let me out of their clutches, at least temporarily. In that way, I had successfully advocated for myself, but still, their abuse, and the abuse I'd suffered before I met them, made me internalize a devastating belief. I wasn't worth protecting. Which is probably why she acted out as a kid, too. I've known lots of people who came to this conclusion after being treated in similar ways. Well, not that similar to what Virginia was treated like, because most of us were not trafficked. We were just exploited by family and friends. But we learn our worth largely by how people treat us. We assume that if we're treated poorly, it's because we deserve it, because we are flawed in some indelible way. We're not. That's who they are, not who we are. But I've been there, and if you've experienced these things, you probably have too. People look at people who act out, who commit crimes, who take substances and have unprotected intercourse as if they're stupid, as if they don't understand how much pain that could be caused. But that's not why they're doing it. They don't feel invincible, they don't feel proud or arrogant, they don't think they're immune to consequences. They think that any consequence can't make things any worse than they are, and at least the rush of taking a risk provides some slight pleasure before the garbage that they are is removed in the world that caused so much pain. Alright, that's it. That's all I have for this one. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.